how to help more students reach their goals using AFL, or Assessment for Learning. Have you ever felt like this in a test or exam? How about like this? What about your students? Do you recognise similarities in their behaviour during assessments? There's clear evidence that the more bad experiences you have in tests, the worse your performance and self-belief or self-efficacy. So in a school context, it means that students that struggle in assessments get graded lower, then get fewer opportunities to excel and gain valuable qualifications while at school. So my research question for the project was, what happens to student performance and engagement in assessment tasks when an assessment for learning pedagogy is used? From a Year 7 class which had 29 students. The class is actually the highest streamed class, but it can still contain students with varied abilities. There are 4 different types of assessment in science, so I selected one type of those 4, which was the data analysis or second-hand data. The tests are usually based around data interpretation and graph construction, and the majority of my Year 7 students are still developing the required skills to draw those graphs competently. So just so you have a better idea, I'll give you an example of a regular assessment of data, and the students are asked to draw a graph on a piece of blank graph paper. By contrast, an AFL assessment may ask them some interpretation questions about graphs first, and then scaffold the graph drawing itself so it's clearer which types of information are required and where they need to go. So the data was collected using the graphing assessments on 2 different topics, so Earth and Space topic and also the chemistry topic. The order of the assessments were changed as well. So the first one was regular, followed by assessment for learning, and then vice versa for the second topic. 3 types of data were collected, some quantitative, some qualitative. So those were the performance or test scores, the perseverance or how long the students persisted with the test, and also their engagement, so behaviours during the test itself or the test themselves. So the data was then analysed, so all of the data was collected and averages calculated along with the standard deviation or variability amongst that data set. The means themselves were then compared using a student t-test for each of those 4 tests. And the test scores were also then compared with the NAPLAN numeracy scores, and a regression analysis conducted to check for any correlations between the 2 test types. Perseverance was measured using a video analysis of behaviour during the Earth and Space tests. So the start and finish times were recorded for 10 students. Engagement was also measured quantitatively and qualitatively, again using video recordings of the behaviour to observe 10 students in those tests. So disengaged behaviours might include things like talking, asking numerous questions, or other out of seat and other types of behaviours like that. So the first graph I'm going to show you are the means of the average test scores. So the bars in green are the assessment for learning tests, and the graphs in blue are the regular tests. So the means were then compared using a student t-test, which showed that there was no significant difference between the regular test and the AFL test for either the Earth and Space or the chemistry topics. The test scores for the regular tests here are again shown in blue, and the AFL are shown in orange. These test scores were then normalised to the NAPLAN numeracy scores for this group of students, which showed that there was a weak correlation between numerical ability or numeracy in NAPLAN and assessment for learning scores. But interestingly, there was no correlation between their numerical ability and the standard or regular testing. Perseverance in test was also interesting. So it was measured, as I said, using the video analysis, and the regular test average time was 37 minutes, whereas the assessment for learning average time was 42 minutes, so about 5 minutes longer. The percentage of students that attempted the graph in question was higher for the assessment for learning than for the regular test. But it's your turn to do an observation. So here's the class during one of the tests. Can you guess if it's AFL or regular? Here's another one. So let's talk about measuring engagement. So engagement was measured on 10 students. Some disengaged behaviours were counted, like talking and asking questions. So in the regular test, there were 60 events of that. In the assessment for learning test, there were only 29. There were also different types of disengaged behaviours during the test, like getting up and moving around. So, in summary, the results showed that assessment for learning didn't significantly improve student assessment scores. But this is good because it wasn't the intention of the study. That would just be making the test easier. AFL did, however, improve student perseverance by an average of 5 minutes, and also all students attempted the graph in the assessment for learning, whereas 20% of students didn't even attempt the graph in the standard testing. So this is good because the aim was to make it equally difficult, but scaffold it better to keep more students trying and trying for longer. AFL also gave a much more accurate idea of exactly where the students were getting stuck on the graphs to enable targeted teaching to those students. So 10 students could do the whole graph. 13 students needed practice with plotting. 9 students needed practice with scaling for the axes. 7 students needed help with dependent and independent variables, so which axis to plot the data on. And 10 students needed help with doing the correct title and units on the graph. Here's some of the references in the presentation. And a final quote: "Instruction does much, but encouragement does everything."